Welcome, everybody, to Recruiting is No Joke. As always, I am your host, Joel Lalgee, the realist recruiter. It is great to be here with you guys. If you're following any of my social media, you will know a couple of weeks ago we hit episode 100. So super cool to be past that milestone. If you haven't listened to some of the past episodes, definitely go back and listen. I have interviewed people from a ton of really, really big companies, small companies, startups, tech, healthcare, tons of different industries. And today I am excited to have a guest, and we're going to talk about an industry which I don't think we've talked about on this show before, but it's an industry that I've recruited in the past. We're going to hear a great story today. So we've got a great guest. So Kala, welcome to the show. Why don't you give everybody a quick intro, who you are, what you do, and who you do it for? Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Recruiting is No Joke. This episode was brought to you by Interactive EQ, a one-of-a-kind talent assessment platform that measures how people would handle real-life situations. The assessments can be best described as an interactive, movie-like experience where the talent plays a first-person character in the story. You can check out what they do here at www.interactiveeq.com and tell them that Joel sent you. We all know that hiring is so much more than just a resume, and now you can find out how candidates will actually react in real-life situations. It's amazing. I've never seen anything like it, and you're definitely going to want to check it out. Now, back to this week's episode. Thanks so much again. We couldn't do it without you.
My name is Kala Kapahalou. I'm the director of talent acquisition for W.E. O'Neill. We are a construction company. We cover mainly the U.S. And then I'm based out of Austin, Texas.
How long have you been at W. O'Neill for?
Actually, I just started. This is week 8 for me. We got a lot of things that we're rolling out. So it's a pretty exciting time right now.
You know, you've been in recruitment for a while. Walk us through what's that journey look like how long you've been in recruitment, how you got into recruitment. Give us a little bit of the backstory here.
How I got into recruitment and how I stayed in recruiting are two different things. So I'll start up with how I got into it. Well, initially, probably like a lot of people, I had other career plans. I wanted to be
What did you want to
chef.
do? I never ask anybody. You want to be a chef?
I want to be a chef. So, I mean, for me, it was like I was always good at cooking. So I applied for culinary school. And unfortunately, the cost of culinary school is kind of crazy. So I figured like, hey, what's the best way to get a job and find some quick cash? And so someone told me like, dude, just go to like a staffing agency and maybe they'll be able to find you something. And so I went in and they didn't have anything. They were just like, oh, would you mind like to be an assistant like to our recruiting team? And I was like, yeah, I mean, cool. I just thought I'd be there for a couple months and get some money to pay for school. I got in and it was kind of like everything that I thought about. I liked about being a chef, like that fast paced, that pressure. And I was like, oh, this is actually kind of cool. Unfortunately, I think I was the quiet kid. And so they felt like, I'm not really sure this is a career path for you. And of course, for me, that's kind of leads into why I stayed in it. I wasn't a good fit. And so I was like, okay, cool. Maybe this is the place for me. So I applied at a couple other places. One of the ladies was just, oh man, she was brutal. She was like, yeah, you're too quiet. Like this isn't for you. And it made me want it even more. So I applied to like 2 or 3 other locations. Finally, I landed in a company, Express, their direct hire and staffing agency. And they were willing to give me a shot. And I ended up working my way through the ranks. I stayed there for about 11 years. And I started off as just kind of like a junior recruiter and ended up, as the talent acquisition manager there after 11 years. And so, I stayed in it because they were just like, I wanted to prove to anybody and everybody that I could do it. And I really started to love it. I mean, the pressure, the fast pace. I mean, you're from that industry, where the hunt. And I've been doing it ever since. So I think I'm on year 16, 17 now.
You had a long tenure in the agency, that staffing space. What and why did you make a transition into that internal space? And how did you go about that? Obviously, you're in construction now. You've been in construction for a while. Was that intentional? Was that unintentional? How did that happen?
But the reason why I wanted to leave and then kind of go into more of the internal was because I hit a point in my career where, I was at the top, I was the senior manager and I was training other recruiters. And I just felt like there's got to be more to this than kind of just sitting in the back office. I felt like I was taking a coach's seat, like a back step. And I think I was only like 30 at the time, maybe 29. And I just felt like, man, I like being in the weeds. Like this is not as fun as I thought it was going to be being the manager. And so I thought, what would be a great growth opportunity for me? And so I decided to move over into corporate. I didn't plan on going into construction. The company that I worked with, we dealt a lot with construction. I was familiar with the industry. But I was just trying to find a job internal. I didn't care what it was. I just wanted to find somewhere where I could learn to be, what I would say, a corporate recruiter. I ended up taking a step back and from the manager role and taking a recruiting job for an environmental firm that worked with like underground civil construction and like power utilities. And they gave me a shot. So I just decided, let's just go see what happens. And I really ended up falling in love with it. I mean, it's been 7, 8 years since that transition. And it's been awesome.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, when they make any kind of career pivot or change, in some ways you have to anticipate that you might have to take a pay cut. Like I know I took a pay cut getting actually into recruitment. I was like a bank manager, managing a bank, managing multiple locations, doing loans. I took a pay cut to get into recruitment. What would be kind of your advice for someone who's maybe debating doing that or they're looking to make a change? Obviously, the short term, you lose some money, maybe you lose some of your lifestyle. Like, what would be your advice for someone looking back now, 8 years on, knowing what you know now?
That's kind of a tough one because for me, like I'm just like I want it. Like I don't care what it is. Like I'll do whatever it takes. But I feel like the smart way to do it would probably be to plan it out. Make sure that it's something that you're ready for. I
Yeah.
usually find that for most people, it's not usually the pay. It's like the demotion and title. Like when I talk to candidates, it's like, that's the hard part. For me,
Yeah.
I didn't really care about that. I felt like it's not where you start, it's where you end up. And so I felt like if someone was willing to give me a shot, just like the first time I worked my way through, but I prepared myself. I made sure that, my bills were in line, and it took me about a year, maybe a year to 2 years to be ready to make that transition. So I kind of got my finances in order, got a smaller apartment. Yeah. And then just made the leap. So I did take my time.
And you don't regret that now.
Oh, heck no. No, I mean, not
Yeah.
just monetarily, but experience wise. I mean, I get to travel. I get to work with great people. I learned a lot during that time. I think it humbled me to go back from being in charge to, being the low man on the totem pole. I learned so much. It's kind of like, like you said, going from banking, you made that real differently. You went from banking to recruiting. So, I think that learning curve, but I think it's cool because you find out at the end, like you can actually be successful at more than one thing.
Yeah.
So it takes some of the sting out of it.
Yeah. And, I mean, for me personally, the banking industry is really regulated. You got a lot of paperwork, a lot of compliance, a lot of things that are not naturally good. And recruiting is more, at least on agency side, a lot more about people, a lot more about making those connections. Still is. I guess you could look at the regulation to like the consistent work. I guess that would be a similarity, and like the process, right? You have a process that you need to follow. You got to be disciplined in that way. I think immediately when people started to talk to me about what recruiting is and how to do it, maybe starting off, I'm not going to be in the exact place I want to be, but I'm going to be able to grow this thing. And I've given that advice to a lot of people as well. I love that advice of like it's better to be like halfway up a pole that you want to be on versus like being at the top of a pole that you don't want to be on. Like ultimately, if where you're going and where you end up isn't even where you want to be, you're better to just start off. But I do think it's hard for people to take pay demotion and then less responsibility and title because we put so much weight on those things. But it's in the long run, what's it going to do for your career? So you're in a construction space right now. Talk to me about that market because the tech market gets so much talk. Everybody wants to get into tech. Everybody wants to get into Facebook or Meta, Amazon, Google, right? Fang. It's been like I don't know what you would call it, like the gold medal of jobs for so long. Talk to me about construction. Like what's going on in that world? Why would that be an industry you think people should even consider, looking at as far as career longevity?
Well, I think, probably some of the biggest misconceptions about construction is that it's all about picking up a shovel. I mean, there's so many, I didn't realize how intricate and how much knowledge and education especially when you're talking about, going into like, project managers and the executive level on estimators and things like that, how much brain power is required to do those jobs, not just physical. And especially when you
so
talk
like
about,
a project manager, some people might not even know what like a construction project manager does. Like what do those types of jobs even look like?
it kind of depends on the field. So in heavy civil, For example, like a project manager will usually probably, they're managing the money. So they're managing the money, they're managing relationships. So they're handling things like budget. They're usually supervising a project engineer or possibly more than one or two. In your project engineers, what they're doing is they're going out in the field. They're making sure that your field teams have what they need. They're keeping the project going. So they're kind of managing the workflow. They're working with your superintendents who are kind of like your boots on the ground, and making sure that they have what they need. They're handling, any type of things that come up, like change orders, which is, when you have to make an adjustment or a tweak to a project. Sometimes those can be, small
And just
amounts.
so we're clear too, when we talk about projects, like construction projects and even those budgets, like give us an idea of like what a budget might look like in a project like you're talking about.
You can have a job that's let's say $1 million. Your
Okay.
project scope is $1 million. So a project would be a job essentially. Let's say you're building a Costco. That could be, maybe, a million plus. The project is Costco, and you could have, depending on which area of construction you were in, because you have kind of your GC, which is your general contractor, which they usually typically oversee the entire project. So they may do everything, or they may bring in what's called subcontractors to actually go in and do that work. So they may manage the process. So they may manage the build process. So they've got people kind of overseeing all the different trades, like your electricians, your plumbers, your framers, all those folks that are coming in to build that job. And so you kind of have broken up into your GC and and then your subcontract. And so
Yeah.
the actual job value would be, $1 million as the PN, as a project engineer. You're going in and you're, essentially managing the workflow. And then the PMs, you're managing the money, the financials, and then everybody's dealing with the relationship, the customer or the client or the owner, whoever that person or individuals are. And so, there's a lot of relationship building in construction. I think it's definitely more relationship based than it used to be. I hear it a lot that soft skills are the new superpower. Like if you can communicate well and advocate for yourself and speak well and handle yourself in meetings and build relationships, I think that is definitely the new superpower here, because construction is all about relationships. In every industry that I've worked with, I haven't seen one where the repeat business is as important and is as big as it is in construction.
Oh, it's interesting because I feel like in recruitment, repeat business is massive, right? And I feel like a lot of businesses, but it's interesting you say that. If you're an owner, you're going to build something, you spend millions. Some of these projects, multiple millions of dollars. You want to really trust that team that they're going to execute, they're going to do what they say. So I'm sure that trust can quickly be eroded as well.
Well, and also ideally, you're thinking about, when it comes to, essentially when you have, like, let's say you have a Costco, you'll have a bunch of companies that will actually go out and bid to do that work. The ideal situation is that you have a relationship with Costco where you're not having to just cut costs, come in at the lowest bid, to where you can actually kind of, make a little bit of money, but you have that relationship that, that you're going to do the job right. Because sometimes, if you go with that lowest bid, you don't always get the quality. So that's where the relationship side comes in, because that way you can hopefully have the relationship to where you can do the work and you're not necessarily having to pinch pennies and cut costs where you're doing the bare bones.
What about in terms of recruitment and hiring in that space? Where is there a lot of demand? Do you feel like you got a shortage of people who are in the field? Should entry level people really be considering construction right now as like a field to go into? What would be your advice for people in terms of do they need a construction management degree? Is that necessary? Like how do kind of people get into the construction field, and what's your future outlook for the industry?
So I think it all kind of depends on where in construction you want to go into. Like if you want to be an operator, going through the union is the best way. So getting an apprenticeship, going to the union, that would be the best way. And there is a huge need of qualified operators. Like I said, there's probably a lot out there, but I think, really good operators, companies are always looking for those individuals, and they're hard to find, believe it or not. I mean, we have a lot of people.
Well, I guess what are those qualifications? And
Usually someone who really understands the machinery. If you're working in, let's say you're working in underground utility work, someone who can operate let's say an excavator, who can pull up the ground and who knows, hey, okay, like I'm not going to hit a gas line, or knows what they're looking for and has got that good experience, because, not everybody has that experience. And so people who really want to do the job well and who have gone through the training, those are always really hard to find. And so, it's just like anything. If you hone in on your craft, you won't be looking for work. This is an industry too where it's growing at a very large rate, and there's always the need for good people. And if you're just trying to get into it, I mean, I think now is as good a time as any, especially because there's so many different areas of construction you can go into.
You got like the field jobs and you got like the office jobs. So what's the outlook on the office jobs? Have you seen a switch where it's like more people are going into office jobs now versus in the field? What are you seeing in terms of demand for those different skill sets?
I think the demand is probably pretty equal for both sides, but I think that the challenge is at the mid to senior level, it's really hard to go out and get those good people. And then usually good people are already working. So it's very competitive. We call it, headhunting, having to go out. Essentially, we're pulling someone from another employer who's got it pretty good. It's really competitive. We have to really vigilant about, really efficient on how we go about that process, but it is very competitive. So if you're in that space already, you're good. You can pretty much go wherever.
What about in terms of like those entry level roles? Are you seeing growth there? Seeing a lot of people like choose to go into construction? Are you seeing a decline there? Have you seen a decline over the past few years?
I think data shows us that there's actually, when it comes to the union, there's actually been a decline. And I think
Why do you think that is?
well, I think it's probably a couple of things. I think one, that job is physically demanding. And there are so many other opportunities now, especially for the younger generation, where, they can go and start their own company, or they can go and find a job that's less physically demanding.
They can start a podcast.
They can start a
don't have to be in
podcast.
shape to start a podcast.
Yeah. I mean, you can start a
This
podcast.
requires zero strength. Okay. I can do this.
But it does require a lot of failure, and, you got to be able to pick yourself back up. And that's one of the things I think is people don't understand about this type of work, is that it's never done. Like you're always taking your work home with you. That's the difference.
Mm.
It's like when you're in the field, once you're done, you're done. I'm sure with you, like I've read your schedule. It's like, you're always working, because when you're not working, you're thinking about how you can do it better, or thinking about things you got to get done. I'd say like the difference between going into the field versus, working in the office space, like being a project engineer and a project manager, you're still considered field operations, but, you're usually not going home just we call it when the bell rings, because, if you could have an emergency where you've got a client that's got an issue that you've got to take care of, you got to make sure that they're taken care of. And sometimes that requires, some additional effort and hours on your part. Not always. I think, the good companies, we really try to be focused on balancing it out where, hey, there's sometimes you got to work more.
Has that been kind of more of a focus that you've seen kind of within the industry in the past few years, or you've kind of seen that change over time? I feel like culturally speaking, everything that you described in terms of, long hours, physical work, and those labor roles, but even as a project manager, it's like you might have something to deal with. It's unexpected. Hey, it happened at 6:30 p.m. You got to stay, right? You can't just abandon the work. And I think a lot of people now culturally, they want the work-life balance. They want to control the schedule. They want the remote work. All of those things are what kind of people skew towards. So have you seen, I don't want to say like a bending of the industry, because that's probably not the right term, but like, have you seen kind of a shift and like a more of a momentum towards those types of things in an effort to try and get people towards the industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think that, it's bringing more people into the industry is a huge plus, because I think the more people are in the industry, the more we're able to put those kind of, I would say, pad our deck a little bit, to where we have, we're not maxing our people out. And, there are companies that run leaner than others. We try not to do that. And so I think you're seeing as an industry, just because we're starting to see that that's not what people are looking for. Like, people want to be able to go home and spend time with their families. I think you're seeing a shift just as a whole to where, work-life balance is slowly creeping up to the top level of what people are looking for. And, they're tying that in with company culture and, work flexibility, and I think in construction, we're one of those industries to where, you do have to be, on site, and you usually have to be, in the office. So yeah, I do see a lot of companies that are trying to offer, balances in, like, hey, extra time off, or, when work slows down or when your projects slow down, you're able to kind of take additional time. They're being as flexible in the best way they can, because at the end of the day, we do have to make sure that the work's being taken care of. Like, yeah, I do see a lot of organizations starting to tackle those concerns, just because I think work-life balance is becoming a bigger topic just across, all work industry.
What about in terms of technology. We hear AI is everywhere. How's AI impacting the construction industry? Not so necessarily so much the recruiting in construction, but what are some of the things that you're seeing? Are those skills becoming more necessary with some of the roles that you're recruiting on?
Not necessarily in the field. I don't see it too much. I think you see it probably from a safety aspect. Like you're seeing our machines become more equipped with safety features, just as cars are evolving to keep from a safety aspect. But there's still that need. When we talk about jobs that are going to be around for quite some time, there's still that need to have people doing that type of work.
So you don't see robots. I've seen these like robots on Twitter where they're in like manufacturing facilities sorting things. They're not going to be invading the construction sites anytime soon. You're telling me.
I don't know enough to speak on it, but I would say it would be hard. That would be a hard one. I don't know if I can take someone like, pulling a trench or like going out and doing shoring or things like that. I don't know if I see
Yeah.
that would take a lot of like, I want to think about like the flexibility and dexterity. Robots are kind of like, they're very stiff. I guess the real word.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it'll be a while, but I mean, AI is impacting the industry and definitely, in the way we recruit, the technology that we're using, because at the end of the day, we're always trying to make things more efficient and more effective. And so, we're always looking to see how AI it can impact the industry itself. In fact, you're seeing a lot more conferences. The conference that I spoke in Dallas a few months ago that was the topic was, advancing construction, and AI was a big part of that. So you're seeing it talked about a lot more.
I would say right now, AI, I think is just, I mean, we beat it to death within recruitment and HR. Everywhere I go, we're talking about it. Starting to see some good stuff. I think what's interesting, and I think we yet to see that true balance between what work is human, what work isn't. But even based on what you said, hey, construction's becoming more relational, right? It's becoming more about people, those soft skills, understanding, because I can imagine in 90-degree weather, you're on a project site, somebody's off schedule, someone doesn't show up, you get materials in that are broken. It's like AI is not going to fix that, but you need someone who's got a cool head that knows how to deal with people, that knows how to deal with some of the problems that might arise that are unexpected, and knows how to keep the relationship cool. I'm curious from your standpoint, are you seeing a decline? I'm thinking more so with like entry level. Are you seeing a decline in those soft skills? Are you seeing like a need for more soft skills with younger people? I guess what are you seeing there?
Yeah, I think so. One thing I want to touch on for me, my mantra behind AI, it's always been AI is a tool. It's not the answer. I think the people that look for AI as the answer, I think it scares people because it's not, and I don't think it's meant to be, but it can be a great tool. I think that to me, like took out initially when it came out, I had a lot of fear, but now I use it as a tool, and you just have to kind of figure out how to best utilize it to where it actually can help you. So I just wanted to kind of touch on that real quick.
Well, you got to understand your workflow. You got to understand what you're working on, and you've got to understand what your processes are and which processes are usually repetitive, what tasks are repetitive. That right there is a challenge for a lot of people because I don't know how much people are really even aware necessarily of what workflows look like and what their processes look like. And sometimes the real fear is you look at the bulk of the work you're doing and the bulk of it's repetitive. And then suddenly you're like, oh, wait, like a lot of this could be automated away. I think you see that at a lot of larger companies. And it might be a job that you've worked for 5 years. And suddenly you're hit with the fact of, wow, like this could probably be automated away because I'm doing the same thing over and over, which is where that fear comes in. But I love that. I love that mentality. Tool, not the answer. You heard it first here on the podcast.
Yeah, I think it's just, and especially for recruiting, I think that just because it's repetitive doesn't mean AI is necessarily going to be the answer. For example, like sending out candidate invites, like when you're talking on LinkedIn connecting, I don't really use AI tools because I found that when I did, it just like, they assume that I knew all this information about them, even though that's a repetitive tool for me. Like I'm going to keep the personal approach just because I think it's going to help. But like scheduling, that's an area where like, okay, that's repetitive, but AI can definitely help that. I think it's kind of looking at your schedule.
You're talking about interview scheduling with people.
Yeah, like interview scheduling. So interview scheduling is a great way to automate, but it's like not everything that's repetitive. You really have to kind of do your homework and understand like how your work schedule and workflow fits into the organization. I think that's probably the biggest switches from going into being more of an agency recruiter versus corporate is really understanding how you fit into the organization and really understanding how the organization views talent acquisition and recruiting, which I think is a tool that a lot of recruiters kind of miss because you really don't understand where you're able to grow and how you're able to add value. I heard that a lot during like the recession. You were constantly sending out things about how other recruiters can add value besides just the regular. You were sending out all those emails and I was reading them too because I was like, okay, cool. Like, how can I add value here? Marketing, great. I'll go out and see what I can do here and build your own brand and all these types of things to grow your following. That's still a tool that so many, recruiters and people in that space can benefit from, just understanding how you fit to the organization that you're in and find those pain points and figure out how to be a problem solver.
In your role now, I mean, you're director, right? You're leading a function. There's an element of your role that's going to be more strategic, more forward thinking. Like you're not just thinking about, hey, here are the open roles I've got. You're thinking, here are the open roles that might be open down the line. I'm going to do some workforce planning. I'm going to look at data. I'm going to look at what areas we're recruiting in, which I think that's more where the recruitment role is going to go to versus, hey, I'm just going to find, I'm going to find the candidates. Now, definitely in construction, if it's more headhunting, I think headhunting is a lot harder to be just replaced by AI. If you're a corporate recruiter that's in tech, but and you're getting 50,000 applicants a week, to be able to screen all of those candidates and give everybody a fair shot and review all the resumes, AI could definitely help with that. Although they may put limits on that. Like I just heard in Europe, they're putting all these guidelines around AI. And one of the areas that's like really high on the list is HR and recruiting. You're going to have to kind of document how you're using AI to make sure you're compliant and, you're following their regulations and guidelines. Obviously, Workday right now, they're in some hot water as well, their algorithm and how they're doing things. So there could be more governance on that as well. And it's a lot for us to pay attention to. Curious though, like just going back to this soft skills piece, I think you brought up a really good point that that's a skill that's becoming more and more valuable. Is that something you're seeing people coming in are kind of lacking? Or do you see that, like, are you seeing like kind of a gap between people who've been in the workforce for a while and people coming in? Curious to see what you're seeing in the field.
Well, I think, you've got the folks who have been in it for, 30 plus years. Maybe construction was different back then. And then you've got those folks who are coming into the industry and they're new, they're learning, they're still developing those skills. They've gone to college or they've done the training, but they just fail to understand how to build relationships and how to communicate. I literally had a conversation with our HR director yesterday about, okay, how I can better communicate to engineers. As you know, we're recruiters, we talk. Yeah, it's like, all right, man, when we're talking to engineers, we got to talk in bullet points. So let's just do it. And it was great advice. I'm so glad that he felt comfortable enough to give it to me because for me, I would say I'm pretty articulate. Those types of things to where, knowing your audience and being able to communicate effective. I don't see it so much. The only reason I say that is I don't see it a lot is because I notice it when I do see it. Like when I see a kid that comes in and, they're younger and they know how to interview well, it's impressive. I think that that's one thing that is missed is really is understanding the human skills.
What makes a good interviewer for you then? Like if you interview someone, what makes a good interview?
Well, I think it kind of depends on the entry level. If an entry level person, like let's say like an intern, someone who's applying for an internship, I love people that have done their homework because, I feel like we're in that kind of, it's so easy to click and apply to every job. And I get it. Market, you're just trying to, weigh your odds and apply to as many jobs to get the right opportunity. But doing your homework before the interview, like if they know about the company and they've, taken 10 minutes to look at our website, and at least can kind of see what we do. To me, that's always a sign of someone who it's a good interview because it tells me they've done their homework. Someone who I don't have to pull teeth from, someone who's able to communicate and, they don't have to answer my questions, to the T, but, if they're able to give me some information and share with me about kind of what they've done and communicate well, those are always good things.
We're not talking about like an in-depth, like knowledge in the history of the company.
No.
We're talking about like, hey, you've demonstrated that what kind of work you're doing and some of the projects you're doing and stuff that you could easily find on the website.
Yeah, like my first question is like, do you know what we do? Do you know what we do? Because here's the thing, like in construction, it's like, in the heavy civil space, I ask that all the time and I would just I would be amazed at some of the answers I would get. I'm like, you guys build stuff, right? Actually, no, where we do roads, we're underground. Oh, and I was like, oh God, this kid has no idea.
Well, it's funny because I did recruitment in construction. As you know, I think I alluded to that earlier. And I've done recruiting in a lot of different spaces. And I remember early on in my recruiting career, I was doing a mechanical engineering search. I think I maybe shared this in an episode a couple of weeks ago. But one of the biggest lessons I learned was you got to know the work that people are doing if you're going to recruit them. I was looking for a mechanical engineer, and there's mechanical engineers that are focused on tiny components. The only problem was I was recruiting for somebody who's working on these huge hydraulic lifts that you'd find it like, like a car, like where you go get your car fixed, those lifts, and then people are underneath it fixing it. The mechanics are underneath it. So you had to have experience with heavy machinery. So I remember going to my trainer at the time and I'm like, "Here, I found 10 mechanical engineers." He's like, "Great job. They're all not a fit." I'm like, "Why?" And he's like, "Just look at what they're doing." It's like, "You brought me someone who's designing tiny components for like lawnmower. Like, we need someone who has hydraulics and pneumatics experience." And then the same applied to construction. Like, one of the biggest things I always had to do was look, are you a GC? Are you civil? Are you renewables? What's the work you're doing? And the reason I'm saying that is because it's a big complaint of a lot of recruiters, right? Like, you're telling me a good sign of someone who interviews is do your homework. It's the same for recruiters. Like, if you're just going after somebody because you found they've got the right keywords, but you haven't actually looked at the work they've done, doing yourself a big disservice. And in fact, a lot of the problems we see on both sides can be eliminated. So do your homework. Anything else that you notice with interviews?
No, I mean, I think that just to build and communicate, do your homework. The saying goes, a lot of it's just showing up, be on time, have your game plan, have questions ready. I think that, I've always had questions, even if they're sometimes they get answered, but I always try to say one or two because it's, we just want to know that you're interested. I think as recruiters, we're naturally kind of gun shy. We're like, okay, like, oh, I want to make sure that this person that I'm presenting it in front of the candidate is going to be the best fit. And so,
Yeah.
you want to eliminate as many of those surprises as you can. Think that, yeah, by, doing your homework and, communicating well, but also having questions. And I think that that's the thing is like any question I've never had a question where I'm like, really? No, I'm always like, all right, cool. Yeah. If that's what you had a question on, like,
Do you think the best questions though are questions from the conversation versus, there's a lot of advice now on TikTok, for example, where it'll be like, ask these 3 questions on the interview to guarantee the job. It's like you want kind of organic questions, right? Like genuinely curious versus like random scripted questions. Or are you saying that it doesn't really matter? Just have some questions.
it's great if they're related to the conversation, because usually like I'm the same way. Like I'll have questions that I need answered for a specific role. But then sometimes it's just questions about like you and I were talking about my couch behind me. It's like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Just like get to know you questions. Like a lot of times, if I find that someone is not, they seem a little tense or whatever, I'll try to get in. I'll ask them questions that they know. And usually usually people know questions about themselves. Like, like, what are you doing on the weekends, man? Like, cause not everybody's a good interviewer. Like I've been on the other side. I know what it's like. And sometimes it is very tense. And some of us, I think I've tried to get better to not making it an interrogation, making it a conversation. I've been there. I know it's tough. So it's like,
You've been reading my post. That's what you've been doing.
Yeah. I mean, like, yeah, just trying to like not make it an interrogation and make it a conversation. Cause that's how well you mitigate surprises. Cause if people don't feel like they can tell you things, you don't want them to find out at the hiring manager stage because that's when it gets bad. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I always tell people in those first conversations, recruiters trying to figure out, hey, are you qualified? Are you interested? And are you affordable, right? Like we're just trying to get that baseline. All those things matter. You can have someone who's really qualified, but if they're not interested, it's not going to be a fit. You could have someone who's interested and qualified, but if you just can't afford it or they're looking for outside of the range you pay, like, it's like, all right, it's not a fit. We're trying to screen those things as well. And then also realizing sometimes there's some flexibility in these types of things and people's interests can change. And sometimes people aren't just looking at the pure salary. They might be looking at other things like we talked about earlier. Maybe they're looking for more flexibility or a different type of culture or they're interested in the project. So there's a lot of nuance. Like I think as recruiters, we don't get a lot of time to figure this out. Like we get a screening call and we're supposed to figure out all this stuff. And it's like, we're the bad guy every time. Like the candidates hate us because they're not getting the job. And then the hiring manager's like, do a better job. You're like, dude, I got half an hour to figure this out. You have like 10 interviews after that.
Yeah, we've got, it's kind of like what do they call it? Like you've got, like when you see like the football, it's like the refs have like 45 minutes to analyze something that happened in like 2 seconds. They have forever to like analyze. And so for us, we do get a short amount of time, but I think that a big part of that or at least trying to, mitigate that, is just understand like, hey, look, we're going to do the best that we can to try to get to know as much about these individuals as we can. It's not a perfect system. I wish it was. I don't think it's ever going to be, because we're still doing with humans. But I think if you can try to make it, a little bit easier for folks to communicate, that's always, I think, helps. Well, I still presented candidates even in later. It's like they were so far off. Like I was just like, because culture fit is the new big thing. Like for us, culture fit, culture fit, culture fit. You can have everything. You can be the most experienced person in the world, but if I talk to you and like you're not a good culture fit, so you just don't have that. Like for us, like we're a very team based organization. So if you're that type of person who wants to go on the individual side, or it's like, look, I just want to be left alone, like that may not be the best fit. So it's like, and that's hard. Because you got to kind of educate that person on that, or that person is just their personality, and it's like, okay, sorry, you check a lot of the boxes. If I put you in this team, you could possibly make everybody's lives miserable.
And no one wants that. Well, look,
we do like a lot of PI and behavioral indexes and stuff like that.
We're kind of coming up to time here. We are at time. I want to thank you for just the knowledge here. With the construction industry, I'm pointing people towards it as well. So I'm definitely going to have a lot of people check out this episode. For people that are looking to connect with you personally and connect with the company, where can people go?
Probably to connect with the company, weoneil.com is the best way to find us. So, feel free to reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn. And of course, you can always reach out to me via email. It's Kala K@weoneil.com. I think that it's it's K Kapahalou at weoneil.com. Yeah, like I said, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm not quite branching out as much as you are on social media, but LinkedIn is probably the easiest way to get a hold of me, because I like to keep it simple.
I love it, man. I love it. Well, Kala, thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your experience. As always, if you've got questions for myself, you can go to www.therealistrecruiter.com. Remember to go back and listen to past episodes. We're over 100 episodes, so there's plenty of listening. And if you can, go to Spotify, go to iTunes, wherever you're listening to this, even YouTube, leave a review. All of those reviews help. And if you're interested in getting involved in the show, either as a guest, you're a talent leader, you've got a story, you want to share it, you want to get on the show, reach out to me. And we'll be back next week with another great guest. So appreciate all of you guys. If you made it to the end, you are the reason we do this show. We will talk soon. Thanks again, Kala.
All right. Thanks. I appreciate it.